here. All right. Going live. I might not be ready, but you know what? Hey, when are we ever ready? When are we ever ready? With that being said, hello everyone and welcome to tonight's podcast. Appreciate everybody stopping by and showing up. It's always a good time for everybody to hang out with us. We appreciate it. Everybody on Pantheon Radio as well as everybody on Twitch. So thank you all so much. Myself and Mr. Muldoon are on tonight. So excited to have Mal back with us. Tonight we're just gonna chat a little bit. We've had some stuff come out lately. We've had class information come out with Bazgrim. We've had the newsletter for April come out with some just really good information about Racken, about our CTO for Pantheon, and it just again some more information about the Black Rose Keep as well. So really good stuff in the newsletter. But tonight I'm going to try to drift off a little bit away from the newsletter. I know that's on everybody's mind because it just came out today, but I want to talk a little bit about the class video that Baz put out with Joppa. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight, and then we're going to get into maybe a little bit of the newsletter later on. But for now, we're gonna stick with the class information. If we don't have time to talk about the newsletter tonight, we're definitely going to talk about it Friday night. And I might bring in some other people. I might not. I don't know. We'll see. But I'd like to talk about the newsletter a little bit more, have a dedicated stream about it because it's a lot in there and it's really, really good. So, you know, hang out with us guys tonight. Bear with us. We're going to churn through some of the class information and just, you know, hang out, have a good time. So with that being said, we got a few announcements, of course, as always. If you haven't already, make sure to go by and drop a spoof commercial, if you will, to pantheonradio.com/compo for the April competition. Again, guys, some cool prizes they give out. I think they're doing this on a monthly basis now, but Pantheon Radio is just really stepping up and going beyond to help out the community, putting together a great community tool with the radio itself and allowing a lot of podcasters, a lot of content creators, a lot of musicians to put their stuff, their information out there and, you know, share it with everyone else. So it's, in my opinion, it's working very, very well. I love the content I'm hearing. I love the music that they've got selection wise. The spoof commercials sound amazing that they do. Really brings the whole production quality to, you know, to where it needs to be at, in my opinion, to be an actual kind of official type of radio. So really, really nice. And I'm excited to be a part of it. I'm really thankful that these guys have allowed me to be a part of it and allowed the show to be on there. So, you know, we're happy to be a part of it. So we always want to broadcast when they do the competitions. We always want to make sure that everybody knows to go out there, check out pantheonradio.com, download the app on your phone and listen to it whenever you get a chance. Because, again, there's some really great stuff out there. So again, with that, there was a few videos on YouTube published. I'll go ahead and just give Az, my boy from Reignborn here, a shout out. So Az put a video out on the Pantheon newsletter just here today. Real quick turnaround. Enjoyed it. Nice little short and sweet video. If you haven't been able to read the newsletter yet, maybe it's worth checking out. Just pop into Az TV on YouTube and, you know, give him a follow, give him a sub, and check out his videos. Some good stuff there. Real quick, Day, I've not read the newsletter. It's information that I'd rather find out when I play the game. No class talk. Well, hate to say it, but I think we're going to talk a little bit about class. However, just so you know, the newsletter didn't talk about classes. So, on that note, I'm not sure what you're trying to say there, Day, whether you don't want to find out about classes or whether you don't want to read the newsletter because you're not wanting to find out about BRK or something of that nature. With that in regards, apologize. We're going to talk about classes tonight. We're going to talk about just a little bit about our opinions of what we heard and things like that. Nothing crazy. I've had an absolutely bombshell of a week. I know Muldoon has been flipped upside down and over again himself. So we're not looking to go real deep, guys. We're just going to have an honest conversation about some things we liked that we heard and things we didn't. So again, you know, thanks for everybody for hanging out with us. Thanks to everybody for tuning in always. And with that being said, Maul buddy, are you ready to talk a little bit about what you heard? Because I'm ready to talk about what I heard. I mean, personally.
Yeah, I'm game. I'm pretty excited to hear the direction they're wanting to take with the class in particular, and we'll get to that.
Okay.
Pretty stoked.
All right. Oh, sorry. I want to read this real quick from Day because I like bugging Day, guys. If y'all don't know who Dayhawk is, so I've had Day on the show a few times, a few nights, and I love Day's commentary. I love bugging Day. He's a good guy, and it's always fun to bug good guys. So let's see here. What do you got for me, Day? Didn't read the Rackin' or Dungeon, just the Spotlight. Okay, so you want to find out those pieces in game. I get it, absolutely. For anybody that did read those or is looking to read those, they're amazing. Just letting you know. Rather learn when in game. That's fair. I think that's really fair. A lot of people have had that same outlook in a lot of different areas of the game. Some people have even, I guess you could say, pledged at a very high tier. And I've even talked to them and they said, no, I don't want to play the game nor look up anything about the game until it comes out because I want to experience it all for myself firsthand in the game. And I said, that's great. If that's what you would like to do, perfectly fine. But have heard a few things about the dungeon, was hoping class information from the newsletter along with the dungeon. So I will say class information, guys, I'm a strong believer that we will see class information coming out here in the near future and start to unroll, some of those classes out to us in somewhat more of a class reveal type of sense. Something that we've seen with the cleric, with the shaman, with the rogue of past. I think we're going to see that for some of the other classes here shortly in the near future. How near of a future is that? I can't say for certain, but I would go to anticipate that there are definitely a few more classes that VR would like to roll out to us and reveal to us kind of officially on the website and things like that. And I would hope to see those, here in the near future. So just bear with them, guys. I know that they're going to get to those as soon as they can, make sure that we get all the information we need and want. But at the same time, I don't think they're going to give us, like you said today, I don't think they're going to give us all the information. And I'm glad they're not giving us all the information. Give us an overview. Give us a high level. Let us find out a lot of this in game. That's what I like as well. So what happened to my YouTube video on Friday? So guys, I'm actually going to go ahead before we get into this. I apologize, Maul. I got to say this before we get into this though. So I just want to say, guys, I'm really sorry about the Friday video. I posted it. I had some questions come back about the Friday video, and it appeared to me that because of the way I went about the Friday video, where I was kind of guiding some of the discussion in certain directions and trying to get people's opinions on different things, it was brought to me that some people thought that I was trying to guide people into believing one way or another, and that I knew something and I was trying to get people to come to that conclusion, or I was trying to explain how the game was going to be. None of that was true. I don't know. There was a little bit of confusion, it seemed, with the video. I had a few people comment to me, send me some messages, and just asking kind of what I meant by this, what I meant by that. And it seemed like it was kind of sparking some questions that I didn't think were appropriate for me to put into people's heads, because it was theories, guys. It was just opinions. It was just theories. We were just having a good time talking about the past experiences and things like that. And it seemed to confuse some people in a way that I didn't mean it for. So I'm going to try to figure out a way to do the Madhouse type episode in a way that people can understand. We're just talking. We're just having conversation. It's just people sharing opinions. I think at one point in time, it was said during the conversation that someone said they liked instances for certain events. And I got feedback that, so there's going to be instancing in the game. And I was like, oh, man. For somebody new coming in from PAX, or, somebody that's just hearing about Pantheon and they're coming in, they're seeing those videos, and that to think that they would think something like that, I don't want to give anybody the impression or give them a false expectation or something like that. Like I said, I'm gonna have to figure out a way to make sure that it's very clear that we're just sharing opinions among, non-developers, just fans, non-developers sharing opinions, having a good time, theory crafting, something. I'm gonna have to make sure that I put 1,000 disclaimers up there and make sure that it's very, very clear that it's not intended to be, it's not what's actually happening in the game. If we're actually stating facts about what's happening in the game, then we'll make sure we try to put something up there about that. But that was one of the things that got confusing for people. At some point in time, I would throw like some actual factual information out there. Then we'd go like directly into this huge amount of theory crafting, and they would hear about instancing. They would hear about certain ways that mobs might be engaged or not engaged, as far as like the most damage dealt or first target, like all this stuff. There's a lot of confusion around it, it seemed, and I removed it. We'll try to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to best do that. But I really want to do that. I had a lot of fun with the guys that night, and I hated that the confusion was there. But again, we'll figure it out. We'll definitely figure it out because it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun with everyone. Day, Rafe, as all the guys, Ken were there, Waffles, and just hanging out with us. None of those more, but they're just hanging out with us, having a good time, and it was just a lot of the guild mates and others, having good conversation. And I hated that it kind of came across that way, but we'll work on it, guys. So with that, I apologize. I'll go ahead and shift back over to the classes. It is something I want to talk about. There was a video that came out with Baz, with Joppa. I know Maul's got his class that he's really excited about. For me, I'm going to go over kind of some of the basics real quick. So just so everyone's aware, if you haven't watched the video, please do. I'll make sure to link it in the description below as we put this on YouTube. And this video will go on YouTube, mind you. But we will put this video on YouTube. We will make sure that we have it for rerun purposes. With that being said, there was 3 tanks mentioned, 3 healers or support classes. There were a total of 5 DPS classes and 2 crowd control or CC classes. We have that quatrinity going on, if you will, within Pantheon. So for what we're looking at right now, this is what it was mentioned. It was mentioned that warrior, paladin, and dire lord would fit in that tank slot. That healer would be the cleric, druid, and shaman. And then you'd have your DPS with your caster DPS, your wizard and summoner. And then you'd have your melee DPS with monk, ranger, and rogue. Also on the back end of that, for your CC classes, you have the enchanter, as well as, and Joppa made sure to mention this very clearly, he is feeling very confident in the abilities of having the bard in by release. Now, does that mean it's locked in, set in stone, guaranteed? I'm not going to say that, and I wouldn't say that just yet, but I would say him feeling confident gives me confidence that we are very likely to see the bard in by release of Pantheon. So with that, the bard and the enchanter being that 4th of the quatrinity there, that the crowd control classes where they're really specializing in crowd control. And we've talked a little bit about how that bard and crowd control might work. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well tonight, just some thoughts on that. So with all that, I'm not going to go through all the video. I want everybody to watch it for themselves, but I do want to go through a few of the classes that stood out to me. And I'll start it out with the dire lord. Now, Maul buddy, I've been talking a lot. I don't know about you, but I personally was a little bit surprised when I heard about the dire lord. Their almost obsession with blood. I don't know about obsession, but their ability to utilize blood and want to utilize blood. I was really curious how they were going to bring this class out, and it sounds, from what we've got, the little teasers, sounds really cool, to be honest with you.
It does sound actually pretty cool. I am not terribly surprised to hear that it is going to be somewhat kind of a weird class, because I really think that they're looking for a way to distinguish the classes from EverQuest when the game seems to be drawing a lot of inspiration from it. It does sound really cool. It sounds like basically just a bloodthirsty, blood vicious, like, I don't know, machine, just rip through stuff. But at the same time, like, it's a tank, so it'll be interesting. When I think of something that, is trying to draw blood and trying to utilize it, I guess I would think something DPS wise. Perhaps it would be in the three tanks, maybe the most offensive of the three, which is rather consistent with other games. Paladin usually being the most defensive, and warrior somewhere in between. Um, yeah, I mean, it sounds really cool. I like that they're really aspiring to try and imagine stuff. Do I think it's like hugely different from a disease or poisonous, like basically a necromancer knight that the Shadow Knight was? Um, you know, Not terribly, but it's all in the implementation. I mean, we've seen, not to really touch on the newsletter, but they tend to put a lot of flavor into stuff. They have Ratmen, very basic race, but they're willing to really develop the details and make a narrative around it. So I think that even just the brief little moment or general idea we have of the Dire Lord, it's going to be pretty neat. I think it's going to be even better than what we imagine now.
Yeah, and they mentioned the Dire Lord using those edge weapons to draw blood or to, have that bleed effect potentially. Like they want to see blood. They want to be able to get their hands, bloody for say. But again, so with them being focused on those edged weapons, swords, axes, come to mind, things like that, I'm assuming that they're going to be a little less likely to utilize any sort of blunt instrument. And then it comes into thought. Now, I want to bring that thought right into the Paladin. So with the Paladin, we heard a little bit about how the Paladins were once clerics and how they basically laid down the tome to pick up the sword type of thing. And they're on a warpath now, more or less against the undead of the world. And there's a little bit of an idea in my head about how that's going to work, but I want to pause there and I'll come back to it because I'm going to talk about that when I'm talking about what the viability is of each one of the tanks. But with the Pally itself, I don't know. I'm really excited to hear that the Paladin has a very vicious appetite for undead. How they will potentially be the most damage effective and efficient class against the undead. And that to me is exciting because I know, like in the past, for example, I've seen like clerics be very, very potent against undead, and I've always thought that doesn't quite make sense. I mean, I get it; they're able to do good damage, but I mean, they used to be able to do ridiculous amount of damage in a very efficient manner against undead. And I always thought, well, paladins should be able to do more because they're the ones that really kind of have that same mentality or the same kind of spiritual belief or background, whatever you want to call it. And they're the ones that are getting on the front line up close and personal. So why wouldn't they have that extra emphasis on it? And it looks like that's kind of where they're going with that, is that Crusader mindset against the undead. That, and I don't know if anybody remembers this, but paladins once were Crusaders. According to Pantheon, back in when they were first getting the classes stood up and they had all the names, a paladin was a crusader. However, they changed the crusader to paladin because it better lines up with what they're looking to do. So I love the idea, the thought behind the paladin. I know we didn't hear an awful lot about it. We heard a little bit more about the Dire Lord, but I love the thought that a paladin can go into some sort of like, I don't know, almost like a holy stance or something. I don't know if it would be a holy stance, but almost like some sort of stance or some sort of
smiting.
Well, not only that, but they can go into. I always think of, and I think I told Dave this the other day because we were talking about a little bit how in World of Warcraft they had the Shadow Priest. So if like you went Shadow form, you were able to do more damage, but you weren't able to do this much healing. And I was thinking, how would you balance a paladin when it comes to undead? Like, are they going to be able to do just ridiculous amounts of damage to undead, but not be penalized in their ability to heal or tank at all? From the sounds of it, it sounds a little bit more like there's going to be ways to help kind of mitigate that, so that every single time you're facing undead, you know, a paladin may have to choose whether he's going to be more of a tank slash kind of doing some off hills or something like that, like more defensive, or if he wants to go offensive, maybe there's something that kind of mitigates his ability to, or at least manages his ability to taunt and heal himself potentially more so. So he's able to do more damage, of course, but it comes with a little bit of a price. Something like that. I don't know what that would be or what that would mean. Like, but you know, like almost like a crazed state. Like the paladin is just so obsessed with getting rid of undead on Terminus that they almost enter like some sort of a crazed state where their mind isn't focused, so they're not able to cast their abilities as, you know, efficiently or effectively, but they're able to do a mass amounts of damage just because of like kind of their rage towards the undead, you know, their anger towards them or something of that nature. I don't know how that's going to work, but yeah, I was really kind of excited to hear that they're looking to balance that. They're looking to make sure that they put some checks and balances in place to make sure that they don't get to where they're running through a dungeon soloing the entire thing of undead because they have just all these massive crazy abilities against undead.
Yeah, I could see that. I think that's kind of an interesting take on the paladin. We always think of them as being really just and holy, but maybe they could be more of a zealot and a little bit more dangerous to themselves or others, or you know, take on a reckless stance just to kill another undead. The only problem I have with an idea of basing a character on its affinity towards certain creatures is that you really then have to focus your content to include that. There are instances in games like EverQuest, and you know, really just any game. I draw a lot of comparisons to EverQuest, but it's what I'm playing now. But if you don't have an area that has undead, then you kind of invalidate some of the class design that you have around undead. So clerics don't have, you know, clerics and necromancers, which have banish undead spells, they can't use them there. Necromancers can't charm. You really start to lose some of that value, and I would hate for them to really base a character on a certain race and then have to be really mindful of that and maybe force undead in areas where they wouldn't normally want to, like if they're producing content or expansion later on where they don't want to have to make undead all the time. I would really caution them to not focus that in a lot of class design. You know, one or two, that's fine, because then you don't have to have Ratman and undead and merfolk and this and that and that to make sure that you're satisfying all the classes each expansion. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. And I guess kind of on that note as well, it brings up, you know, the point of how would you balance the tanks? And again, I think that's one thing I noticed when I was listening to Joppa speak, which was he wants to find a way to make sure that all these classes are viable. All these classes have meaning, have value, have their potential kind of niche within the game that makes them a value to any group. Some, depending on the content, may be more valued or less valued than others. And again, when I was thinking about the Dire Lord, when I was thinking about using edged weapons, I know that in some of the streams of the past, we heard like hints like, oh, well, maybe a skeleton isn't, you know, maybe a skeleton has some sort of, not immunity, but maybe they're just a little more resistant to edged weapons. It doesn't affect them nearly as much. It's less effective. That's the word I'm looking for. It's less effective. An edged weapon is less effective to like a skeleton, for example. So piercing or slashing isn't quite as effective as blunt, crushing objects towards a skeleton. So that's when I start to think of, okay, well, a Dire Lord sounds to me like they really want to use an edge weapon and they really want to have blood. Well, skeleton not only doesn't want or doesn't have blood, but it's less effective to use a edged weapon against them. So if you're going to a zone that's primarily undead skeletons everywhere, maybe there's a boss fight or two that have some sort of undead creature in there that really has no blood for them to utilize some of their abilities against, or even they're less effective because their swords or their axes don't produce blood, or are even just less effective against their body type. I think that's really interesting because then you have the paladin on the other hand, which could be very effective. Maybe they use some sort of blunt instrument, a mace, or even a one-handed or two-handed mace or staff or some sort of, I don't know what they would use exactly, but some sort of blunt instrument that could potentially be very effective. And with their ability, their skill set against undead, I mean, they could be very, very, very effective and beneficial having a group in that circumstance. Now, then I looked at the warrior and I was, and I'm sure that there's going to be flip sides to that as well. Maybe a dire lord during a different encounter where, a mob type is a lot more susceptible to edge weapons, and maybe the dire lord becomes very much preferred in that situation, that circumstance, over the paladin. However, again, I looked at the warrior and I was like, okay, well, I can see kind of the paladin and dire lord, like where they can interchange, where they can kind of trade off on which one might be the most effective, but they still have the ability to tank. It just may not be as effectively in certain circumstances against certain types of mobs as the other, but they still have their high pros and low cons kind of thing. Then I was looking at the warrior and I was like, well, how does the warrior fit into this picture? And the warrior to me is kind of the middle ground. The warrior to me is that one, tank that no matter if you're in an undead dungeon or no matter if you're in an underwater dungeon where, or no matter wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, warrior to me is one of those that will be viable almost equally throughout. So, a paladin in an undead dungeon may be a little more effective and efficient at tanking and have a little more ability skill sets towards those undead than a warrior has. But then again, in another circumstance, maybe the dire lord has a little bit more of an edge against a warrior. But then on neutral ground, I think a warrior will always be right there in the mix as well. So I think for me, that warrior, for example, really stands out as kind of that you don't have to worry about it nearly as much. You can deal with any situation, and potentially they have skill sets and abilities that allow them to be a great main single target type tank without having to utilize a lot of skill sets to keep that aggro, to keep that focus on them. I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but I like the fact that there's kind of there's some high and low points with the dire lord paladin. And as trade-offs for that, like there's trade-offs for those two. I like that the thought that they might balance back out around where the warrior is, and the warrior will continue to be kind of that constant throughout. That's my thought, at least. Again, I want to say this as a disclaimer, guys. We're theory crafting here. We don't know all the answers. I don't want to mislead anybody, but that's my thought, at least. That's kind of where I'm thinking that might go, and I like that thought, actually. I kind of like that thought. I think that makes sense to me. I can understand it. Does that make sense to you?
Man, the one moment I take a bite of food and you really throw
Okay.
it back to me.
Okay. Okay. No, you're good. You're good. I was just going to talk about the summoner anyway, so it's not a big deal. You can eat, and then we'll skip the summoner, and we'll go on to.
Yeah, let's skip it. Not even worth talking about it.
Yeah,
Let's
right.
talk about tanks all night.
Well,
it makes a lot of sense to me, but actually, what I was going to point out is that in EverQuest, sorry guys, in EverQuest, the big problem is that the only viable tank for a long time was a warrior. In some raid encounters, you could have, other tanks, but for the most part, the warrior was it. And I really hate to see tank balance is really important because you want people to play tanks. Without tanks, you don't have groups, you don't have people going around. And you don't want people to feel like if they play a tank, they have to play a certain tank because it's really the only viable one that people want to take with it. There's going to be people that play whatever they want regardless, and that's fine. But there's going to be a lot of people who min-max and they want to play something valuable. Part of being in a group and playing a character that you choose is because you want to feel valued. You want people to want you in a group. I think that the tank balance is probably the most key one that they're going to have to really focus on. And I don't want the Warriors' draw to be that it's so capable in all situations. It's just not as capable as a paladin versus undead, and it's not as capable as a shadow knight versus like humanoids, or whatever blood drawing situation from that. Because I would find that to some extent then people start to favor one tank over the other, especially if you're looking at content that, oh, it's an undead raid, why have anything other than a paladin?
Yeah.
So I guess I'm most worried about them being really creative with the tank classes when it can go really in a bad direction. However, I don't say that with the idea that I don't have faith in Visionary Realms to balance that. I guess I don't find myself wanting to be as imaginative with the tank classes when I think the most important thing is to make them all three viable. So I guess that's kind of where I sit with that, and I worry about the concept of them having advantages over one another, and then the warrior just being kind of, it's good. It's good all around.
Well, and I think I misspoke or mispresented how I was trying to get that across, and I apologize. Yeah, Mass made a really good point. That Joppa said he wants to prevent people from being like, oh, we're going into an undead area, let's go get a paladin. Let's kick the Dire Lord and go get a paladin. Like, I don't mean that the differences are so dramatic that you have to have one versus the other. I'm just saying there's a slight advantage potentially in certain circumstances. And I think that's with any class. You're going to be better in certain circumstances, whether it's climate, mob type, or, atmosphere, or whatever it may or may not be. There's certain circumstances and aspects of the game that will make you a little bit more efficient in this aspect versus not in this aspect. And I didn't mean to make it sound like there was this huge disparity between the two, like that none of them were going to be viable. I would think any one of the tanks would be viable in an undead raid. Don't get me wrong. I think there might be a little bit of a difference between how they have to go about getting to be that viable tank. The Dire Lord may have to change up their game plan a little bit based, against undead. The Paladin may change up their game plan a little bit against undead as well, because they may have a different game plan for undead, like you said, humanoids or something. I'm not trying to say that one is going to be exponentially better than the other at any circumstance. I just wanted to say that I think that they're going to make it to where situationally you will have to change how you approach the fight and instance based off mobs and stuff like that. And with the tanks, you'll have the ability to do that, but it's going to be different for the tanks. It's going to be different all around. And the warrior, in my mind, I don't know how to picture this or draw. I wish I could draw it on like a board or something. Yeah, the warrior I think will be more like, it's going to have its kind of like ups and downs, but it'll be like a little wave almost, like it would be, it's going to be very viable in all circumstances, but it's going to be like slightly different in each one, a little less effective, a little more effective, like up and down, where I think the Dire Lord and Paladin would be kind of the same if you utilized all your skill sets and abilities exactly the way you're supposed to or intended to. But then again, they could also have to where if you're not utilizing certain skill sets or abilities that maybe you haven't obtained yet, the difference may be just a little more steep. And that's all I was trying to say, was that it may fluctuate just a little bit more. But I think that you're both right. I think Mass, you're right. I think Maul, you're right. I have complete faith in Joppa and crew, and I think that all three warriors are going to be completely viable in every circumstance. I don't see how they couldn't be. I think that they're doing a fantastic job, and they're continuing to look at that. And I apologize for talking about warriors so much. I just thought they were fascinating to me. I'm not a warrior player, I'm not a tank player. So for me, tanks are very interesting because I just don't get the gameplay or the style of them. They're difficult for me. I'm the Ronick of the world, and it's a joke, guys. Ronick's a good guy, but I'm just, again, I don't know. I can't wrap my head around tanking as much as other people can. So for me, that's a very fascinating subject, and I struggle a little bit with the concept. So I think that you're right, though. I think that absolutely they will all three be viable, and I can see that Joppa would and crew would make a way to ensure that when you get to a certain encounter, you're not going to go, oh, we need to kick the warrior and get a paladin. Oh, we need to kick the warrior and get a dire lord. Oh, we need to kick the dire lord, get a warrior. You know, I can see that not happening. I can see them all being viable. They just may have to go about being viable in certain circumstances differently. So hopefully that clears up, and I apologize if I kind of went around the world on that one. But hopefully,
no worries.
Yeah, hopefully that clears it up a little bit. In the meantime, I kind of had an idea how the summoner would be. And I know that you are looking to play a summoner when Pantheon comes out. So I got to get your opinion. What did you think when you heard about the summoner? So similar to an EQ mage.
Right. And so for me, that was fine. I guess that's what I expected it to be. I'm really glad to hear that Joppa would really like to imagine the summoner doing more summoning during the fight. What I hope that means, regardless of everything you said, what I hope that means is that, like, the mage in EQ1, it had fire spells, it had rain spells, which were, you know, fire raining down in multiple waves, or it had like sword magic based attacks. It was basically like a wizard with a pet. What I would like to see is if the summoner's going to have a static pet just like the magician, great, but it should also, as its only other source of damage, it's not conjuring fire, it's not summoning elements, because a wizard does it already. I would like to see them summoning straight up additional elementals that are a limited pet for about 30 seconds that does damage over time, or swords that come out and deal damage over time, or like summoning certain other things, like summoning a rock out of the sky to fall on something, you know, like actual summoning. I think that would be interesting if their spells looked like they were actually bringing stuff out. What I had hoped it would be is that instead of having a static pet at all times, kind of like the Final Fantasy XI summoner, is that they summon a major thing during a fight and use that for all their damage, and maybe have some augmenting spells that utilize certain aspects of that pet, where it's like they activate some special spell for that pet. But I knew that wasn't what it was going to be. So I say all that because I don't feel disappointed. I'm actually glad to hear what Joppa wants the summoner to be. I just worry if it's enough. I'd really like to know what he means by put a hand into an actual dimensional hole, pull something out and use it. Like, you're not going to summon a sword during the fight and hand it to somebody. So what does he want the summoner to pull out of a dimensional hole, and how will it be used in combat? I guess that would be my question. No, and I'm very passionate about the class, so if I sound very passionate, it's because I am.
No, that's a really good question. So as I was hearing about it as well, I was kind of in the same. Okay, well, you know, again, I think that, of course, we're going to leave some room for thought here, because that's just how VR and Joppa and all these guys like to do. They want to not give us all the details, give us enough to keep us interested and to have us thinking, but kind of leave it a little bit vague. And I kind of got the same impression. I was like, well, hold on, how is that going to work? I'm not going to summon something to hand to somebody in the middle of an encounter. That doesn't make sense to me. So what am I summoning? What am I going to use? Coach T here in Twitch chat put summoning swarms and stuff. Yeah, I mean, like, what am I summoning during that encounter? Like, if summoning is the focus of the summoner, then, like you said, summoning a rock or summoning some sort of magical gear or shield or barricade or whatever it may or may not be. What am I summoning, and how does that actually work or impact the mob that we're facing? So I was really happy to hear that, he sounded excited about the pets looking cool. I love cool looking pets. I don't know if y'all know this, but I have like kind of this pet thing. Even though I don't play a summoner or a wizard or I'm sorry, a summoner or a mage, but I love the way pets look. It's weird that I don't play those classes in EQ or don't plan on playing one in the Pantheon, but yet I have such a kind of thing with pets. Yet I like that he said pets looked really cool, or was really cool, meaning I think he's really excited about the pet. So I'm hoping that we do see some variations in that. And he did mention that I think it was reactive summoning, kind of like, you're in the middle of a fight, something happens, you react to it, you summon something that will help that encounter based off of what, whatever you're having to do at that moment in time. Yeah, I'm really curious. How is that going to work? Like, what does that actually mean? What does that entail? And I think in the future, when we see that come to light, I'm going to be thinking about what you're saying here, which is summoning something, some object, something that will do the damage for you. Not necessarily you throwing a fireball or you using a wizard type DPS, but you summoning something that does damage versus you using some sort of wizard spell to do damage. I think that idea is really neat.
I think so too, and I will say I was pretty happy to hear that they're putting a lot of effort into making the pet look cool.
Yeah.
Because I think when you look at a summoner, the summoner, him or herself, really probably won't look all that interesting. That's one thing I liked about Final Fantasy XI is that they had class armor and they had iconic ways to look at them. So they did actually look pretty cool. But in this game, I kind of imagine both of the, well, and if the Necromancer makes it in, that the casters would all look pretty much the same. Robe. Maybe the handheld things like staves and stuff would be different, but I would really like the pets to be striking. Even if the spells that they have aren't that big of a deal, the pet looking badass would be really neat.
I agree, absolutely. I think the pet was the one thing that made the class for me in EverQuest. I didn't necessarily care what the summoner himself looked like. Watching one of those giant bulking mage pets come around the corner with like dual wielding some massive swords or something, I just remember, that looked sweet to me. I was excited to see that come around the corner, whatever it was or wasn't. That was just cool. So yeah, I'm excited to see what the pets look like. But on that note, I know we're getting close on time here, so I'm gonna skip through a few things here. So wizard, I've got here. This is literally what I wrote down: raw damage, boom, boom, boom. Wizards are nuke king, but they did mention that they want the ability for the wizard to do like small amounts of DPS while maybe like regaining mana. So they're not just nuke, sit med, nuke, sit med, nuke, sit med type playstyle, but they're more engaging and consistent type of playstyle. So we'll look to see what the wizard entails as it comes out. But again, that really heavy DPS potential from a caster range, with the ability hopefully to also stay engaged during those not as needed to nuke type time frames, not just sitting there medding type deal. Then you have the assassin the rogue, also kind of like that assassin trickster, so to speak, how Joppa put it. They did mention a few things about the rogue, but I'm not going to go into it too much because we're running out of time, and there's at least two other classes that I want to talk about. Well, three really, but I want to talk about two mainly before we get out of here. So we're going to make them quick if we can. If we don't get to them tonight, guys, I apologize. We'll try our best. On that note, so I'm going to mention this one first because I think this is really cool. The druid being one of, like he mentioned, the cleric being more of a single target burst or direct heal type of healer. He mentioned the shaman being that kind of group, hots on everybody, their heals over time type deal, some slows and things, but they're masters of over time, quote unquote. So they have the ability to put like hots on the entire group and keep the entire group kind of topped off and healed up and, mitigate the damage that way, where a cleric will be more of that direct heal. But then he mentioned the druid being an indirect healer. That was kind of the idea for the druid. And I was like, wow, that's really neat. I don't know how that's going to work. Like, what would that entail? What would that actually look like? And yeah, I'm not sure what that actually means, honestly. I've been trying to think about it a lot, and I was like, what does that mean? Does a druid summon some sort of plant near allies that lets off some sort of heal, or I don't I don't know. I really the indirect healing, it actually kind of throws me for a loop, and I think that that was intentional. I know that he said he was going to leave it as that for until later, but man, that was gonna stump me for a while. I think I'm gonna have to really hear what their ideas on that because I'm not sure myself.
Yeah, and man, I always said I was a very optimistic, positive person, but I have a lot of criticism. I point things out. I'm very good at that. And this is going to come off negative, but that worries me about the druid, honestly. I kind of worry about the nature of indirect healing. I've seen it in other games, and perhaps that's not what they mean, so I'm not getting all up in arms and crazy about it. But um, the tanks and healers are, I could see them having multiple types and wanting to create variety, and in that variety we're trying to create balance. But I would sure hate it if indirect healing were seen as something you could only have for group content because it was just not sturdy enough for raids. I just want them to be really careful about that kind of stuff. But before I have that strong opinion, I agree. I would like to kind of know more about that, and I'm very interested in that because I like how they're trying to find interesting ways to have a healer instead of I'm casting a heal spell, cool, it landed. It sounds like they're really wanting to go in a way more interesting direction. That sounds really cool. I just, again, would like for them to be very cautious about trying to get too creative and essentially creating perhaps an overpowered situation, but indirect healing has historically not been a great thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, so I'm really curious as well, and I'm kind of in the same boat. I'm not gonna overthink it or overanalyze it too much because I think that they might have an idea in their mind that really I have never even considered, and I'm excited to see what that means. But I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't know what that means enough to be overly concerned, worried, or happy about it at this point. I'm just curious. So we'll find out more about that. But the last class, I know we're running out of time here. The last class, one of the most controversial in my opinions, honestly, the Ranger. I won't go into the Bard, guys. We don't know enough about the Bard tonight. I won't go in the Bard tonight. The Bard being a CC class, we'll have a discussion on the Bard when time comes. But I do want to mention the Ranger. Now, the mention of the Ranger was that they will utilize both melee and ranged, and I believe, y'all have to correct me if I'm wrong here, Joppa even mentioned that the Ranger's most powerful damage abilities will be through melee, although their bow will be very vital in their kit as well, even having some sort of pet affinity that he might speak to later as well. So, I mean, I know for me, I'm not upset about this at all. However, and he even mentioned it as well. Baz mentioned it. The Rangers were kind of a left behind class of EverQuest for a long time, and they had similar idea or mindset behind them in that aspect. I'm very curious to see how the Ranger turns out. I'm excited to see. I think that's kind of the risk versus reward. Getting up close and personal to do the most damage increases the risk of being hit or being part of an AoE, ability, or, having to deal with all the different things that are happening at close range. I think that that's a little bit more like the risk versus reward. But I'm definitely curious to see what type of abilities they have at range as well, what that encompasses, and then that pet affinity. What does that mean exactly? Down the road. So I don't know. I was actually not upset to hear this. I was not, I guess you could say, overly happy. I was just, that makes sense. I get it. Type of mindset. I don't know what you thought as well.
I would like range DPS to be more featured. I think that part of the allure of a ranger is that it could do archery, and that one would assume that could be featured more. They already have a couple of melee DPS classes, and I'm sure the Ranger will be so much more layered than that, but for that to be the primary way that they deal damage is a little underwhelming. I'm not happy to hear that, and that's coming from somebody who, yes, I have a Necro right now in the TLP, but I'm working on twinking up, and I plan to main a Ranger because the Ranger gets insane range damage here pretty quick. Probably within the next I want to say 6 months, because of how they unlock stuff. I'm excited about that. I think it's fun. I think it's fun to have a bow and arrow and to chuck stuff kind of like a bow wizard. You know, you're just doing small little nukes that are very quick and over time do a lot of damage. I guess I'm not happy to hear that it's kind of like oh, you might step back and do some damage. It's good in a fight with a lot of point blank AOE on a boss or something.
Yeah.
Other than that, I don't feel very strongly. You're right. We don't know enough about it. Maybe they'll change their mind. It's not set in stone. But I was a little underwhelmed to hear that it was a melee focused class for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think he mentioned that to be the most effective, they'll have to utilize both their melee and range capabilities to get in and out of a fight, things like that. So they could be a lot of fun. I mean, they could tweak it to where yeah, you're getting in to really do a burst of melee damage, but that melee damage may have an extended cooldown to where you have to then get it ranged in a quick manner to continue to put out damage consistently, while again being able to then come in close for some quick burst damage and then again back out again for some continuous DPS as you go. So I'm really just curious to see how that's going to work overall, like how that's going to actually function and play out. But I'm very hopeful. I mean, like I said, I've not had anything that these guys have thrown at us that's been like, wow, that's crazy. I can't accept that, in my mental capacity. But for the Ranger, again, I think if they make it to, from what I understand, I think if they make it to where it's a very versatile class in both, then it potentially allows you to say, okay, I want to focus on range DPS, and I'm going to utilize all my skill sets and abilities that are ranged to really maximize my DPS, because that's the playstyle that I enjoy, and I'm hoping that playstyle would be viable. Now, if you wanted to min-max for say, then yeah, you might have to utilize both some melee and some ranged capabilities to really min-max your output there. But again, I would like to see it somewhat viable either way. So we'll see. We'll have to wait and see. We'll have to just kind of sit tight on that one. I think that there's a lot that we don't know. So it's really way too early to make a judgment. It's very, very early to make a strong judgment on anything at this point. We just don't know enough about any of the classes to make really one of those like hardcore, oh my goodness, you can't do this type of statements. But again, I didn't hear anything in any of the class, pieces or information. I didn't hear anything that was just like a huge kind of turnoff to me. Instead, it was more of I understand that. Like the way that Joppa was explaining it, the way that he was going about it, it was like, okay, I can understand that. I can get on board with that. I can test that. I can, try that out and see what that does. Get into game, once we get into release, create a few characters and play around on them for a few levels and see, okay, how does this work? How does this work type deal. I mean, I could see like some of these being classes that I would do that with, that I would jump into the game, come release, create a bunch of characters and then, jump in there for a few levels and test them out or something like that. Like I could see that happening. But there wasn't one class that I said, oh, that class just isn't going to make it. Like, that was one thing I was really excited to hear actually. There wasn't one class where I was just like, wow, that class doesn't seem like it really has a role or a fit or a need. Instead, it was like, okay, I can see where this class might be, where this class might be preferred or where this class might be needed or where this class might excel. Like I was, trying to think through situations and things like that. And I was like, wow, I can start to kind of put it together in my mind, how these classes are going to come together and stuff like that. So I know we're out of time. And I wish we had more time to talk about it. It's really, guys, this is just theory crafting. We're just sharing opinions. We don't know enough information about anything at this point to be, up in arms for say. And there's a lot of different opinions when it comes to classes and how they should be made based off of different game experiences and things like that, history with MMOs. So try to keep an open mind. That's what I can say. Try to keep an open mind. Give the classes a chance. Like before you go on the forums, before you go out on Twitter, before you go out on Facebook and start blowing up about how your summoner is ruined and you hate the thing that they said about the summoner, or you can't believe he didn't talk more about the enchanter and you're so mad about it that you can't see straight. I would say just keep an open mind. Take a breath and wait until we can get into the game and play. And then let's give, let's see what it comes out to then. Because I strongly believe that they're looking at each class individually for how to make it viable. That's something that wasn't done in a lot of the past MMOs that I played. It seemed like they had one or two classes that they're like, yeah, we want this class, but we didn't really know how to make it viable, so we just threw some things on it. I don't think I'm seeing that with Pantheon, with VR's mindset. Instead, I think I'm seeing that every class has a need, or you always have a need for these classes. You always want these classes in your group for certain roles and things like that. And I think that there's ways that, we'll be able to utilize each one of the classes and they're going to be viable, to say the least. So I'm excited to see what more comes from the class reveals, hopefully in the near future and things like that, as they come out from VR with some more information around them, maybe even some, streams later down the road where we get to see some of these classes and play, a little more so than we've seen already. I'm just excited to see what comes next. But any last words, Maul, before we take off?
No, I'm sorry, guys, if I sounded overly negative about things. I'm just a really cautious person when it comes to game design. I'm excited. I really like that they're coming out with some of this information. That's some of these classes have been shrouded, and we now at least know a little bit more about them. And I'm confident they'll get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. Well, if you haven't already, thanks everybody for jumping on and hanging out with us on Pantheon Radio. Make sure you go check out pantheonradio.com. As always, enter the competition they got going on. And also, if you haven't, down here, you'll see it right below me. You'll see Muldoon's link. That's Mr. PD Muldoon. So make sure you go give Maul a follow on Twitch. He'll be streaming Pantheon as well. Once the game comes out, he'll be continuing to hang out with us on the podcast and really give us some awesome feedback. Love having his opinion here. And if you haven't already, make sure you follow my channel as well on Twitch, which is twitch.tv/Saicred. That's SAICRED. We'll be doing these podcasts twice a week. And once we're able to get into the game and showcase that, I'll be showing the game 24/7 on the stream as much as humanly possible. Muldoon's going to be doing the same on his stream. So there's plenty of others out there. We're always looking to promote and help showcase some of the content creators that are out there, some of the future streamers of Pantheon. Really excited about the game itself and where it's going. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about, but there's a lot we don't know. So, save those opinions, save those judgments, I guess you could say, for a little bit later. That way we can see what these classes unfold into, and then we can make some really strong opinions, I guess you could say, based off of what we see in the game, not based off of what we're reading or the small little tidbits of information we're getting at this point in time. Have faith. That's all I can say. Have faith, because I know I do, and these guys have not let me down so far. I've enjoyed every stream I've seen. Everything I read as far as information goes, I have nothing that stands out to me as just being this overly negative or wow, that's a huge downside. Everything to me just seems very positive. I like the direction they're going. Even if I don't fully agree with it, I go, you know what, I can understand it. And if I can understand it, then I'm okay with it. And I think they do a fantastic job of at least explaining their intention of how this is supposed to go, what this actually means. And, like we mentioned earlier with the Ratkin, they can take something very simplistic and really put a story behind it and make it mean something within the game, make it have value, make it have that stand out. So again, we'll continue to do the podcast twice a week, 10:30 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Stay tuned. drop in, guys. I think we're going to try on this Friday to get another madhouse or something like that, and we'll try to figure something out that's more fun, especially around the newsletter. I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to get some other opinions. Me and Maul maybe kind of run a round table with some other guys and have some fun with that. We'll see. But until then, guys, y'all have a good night, good day, and we will see you then. Thanks.
Good night, guys. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
And boom. All right, cool, man.